They said it was company policy. They said it was for the best. But what they didn't say, what they didn't dare whisper aloud, was that I was 6 months pregnant, carrying the most important life of my life, and suddenly, in their eyes, too inconvenient. I remember the moment in sharp detail. The boardroom smelled of expensive coffee, polished wood, and something metallic, like ambition being carved into submission. The termination letter slid across the table toward me, perfectly folded, perfectly impersonal. "We're sorry, but your position has been terminated," said my manager. And then, the line that cut deeper than any knife, "We hope you understand, it's nothing personal." Nothing personal. The words echoed inside my skull as if mocking me. They thought firing me would end me. They thought removing my paycheck, my office, my influence would erase my ambition. But here's the thing they didn't understand: I rise. I plan. I calculate. And I wait until the moment I can make them regret underestimating me. I sat in that room, gripping the edge of the polished table until my knuckles whitened, and let them think they had one. On the inside, my mind was racing, mapping possibilities, calculating outcomes. I would not just survive. I would strike back. And not with anger, not with revenge born of rash impulse, but with strategy, precision, and patience. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I watched the city glow through rain-streaked windows. The hum of traffic outside seemed to echo the rhythm of my thoughts. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling the tiny heartbeat of my unborn child. A flicker of life, a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for the life that would one day inherit a world that had tried to tell me I didn't belong. I opened my laptop and began researching. The largest competitor of my former company was quietly expanding, undervalued, and underappreciated. A perfect target. And I realized something terrifying for them: I had the means, the network, and the knowledge to buy it. While they thought they had ended me, I was preparing a comeback that would leave them scrambling. By sunrise, I had a plan forming, a strategy that would not just return me to power, but ensure that the company that had cast me aside would never forget my name. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "They think they can erase me. They've made the biggest mistake of their lives." It wasn't just the firing that stung, it was the betrayal. Colleagues I had trusted, friends I had confided in, vanished the moment the word pregnant left my lips. Emails went unanswered. Invitations to meetings disappeared. My mentor, the person who had once promised to guide me, sent a simple, cold message: "Maybe this is a sign to slow down. Your timing, it's off." Off? My timing? I had dedicated years to building my career with long hours, strategic decisions, and relentless ambition. And now, in a single, dismissive meeting, all of it was erased. I wasn't a professional anymore, I was a liability. Walking through the empty corridors of the office one last time, I noticed the subtle details I had ignored before. A nudge of laughter as I passed, the way someone quickly turned their screen away when I approached, the polite nods that hid amusement at my expense. These weren't mistakes, they were patterns. Every subtle slight, every undermining action, painted a clear picture: in their world, women were tolerated, but never allowed to lead. I remember sitting in my apartment that evening, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. The city lights shimmered on the glass, fractured, like the reflection of my own shattered trust. My hand instinctively rested on my belly, feeling the tiny, steady pulse of life inside me. That small heartbeat was my anchor, my reminder that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the helpless employee they thought I was. The seed of my comeback had been planted, watered by betrayal and sharpened by injustice. I began documenting everything. Company policies that discriminated subtly, missed opportunities, internal conflicts, client complaints ignored by management. Every piece of evidence was a building block, a key to a strategic plan that would reclaim everything I had lost, and more. I spent hours analyzing the competitor firm, noting their financials, their strengths and weaknesses, the inefficiencies my former company had ignored. I spoke with investors discreetly, gauging their interest. Every call, every meeting, every subtle insight was another thread weaving a net that would one day trap those who had dismissed me. And all the while, life inside me moved in quiet rhythms, independent of the cruelty outside. The baby reminded me of why I could not fail. Not just for me, but for someone who would inherit a world where women are often silenced before they can even speak. By the end of the week, the first breakthrough arrived. Enough backing, enough leverage, and enough confidence to make a serious bid for the competitor firm. I realized that betrayal, when understood and harnessed, could be transformed into power. And in that quiet apartment, I whispered my first promise, "You'll see. You thought this was the end. But it's only the beginning." The weeks after my termination were like walking through a storm I couldn't see but could feel in every interaction. Every step forward came with resistance, every call I made with hesitation, every email with skepticism. The corporate world had a way of closing ranks, and suddenly, I was the outsider they all warned against. "Are you sure you can handle this?" Both the acquisition and the pregnancy, one so-called friend asked, her voice dripping concern that felt more like judgment. Another smirked behind her hand, "It's going to get messy. Don't you think waiting might be smarter?" Each question, each comment, was a blade meant to shake me, but it didn't. It only reminded me why I had to succeed. Then came the media. A local business outlet caught wind of my move and spun it into a story of recklessness. Pregnant CEO? Is she biting off more than she can chew? Headlines screamed at me from my laptop screen, the bold text mocking, questioning, daring me to fail. I felt the familiar tug of doubt, that quiet voice inside asking if I had overstepped. But the anger inside me was stronger. Every sneer, every headline, every whisper of doubt became fuel. I called investors calmly, one by one, walking through the data, explaining growth potential, and dismantling their concerns. "Look at the numbers, look at the market. Risk is measured, not feared. The opportunity is enormous," I said. Every objection was countered, every fear neutralized. By the end of the week, my backing was stronger than I had dared hope. The irony wasn't lost on me. The world was trying to bury me while I quietly built the foundation of my comeback. Still, conflict wasn't just external. At night, alone in my apartment, exhaustion weighed on me like a physical force. The pregnancy made everything more taxing: fatigue, nausea, aches I couldn't ignore. The stress of negotiations, investor calls, and secret meetings piled on top. I had to learn to balance fear with determination, weakness with focus. Each moment of doubt was a test of resilience. And yet, in the quiet of the night, when the city slept, I reminded myself why this mattered. It wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation. It was proof that ambition could not be silenced by bias or fear. Every client I won over, every detail I uncovered, every strategic move I executed was a silent declaration to those who had laughed at me: I am still here. I am still capable. And I will rise higher than you ever imagined. By the end of the month, I had not only secured additional funding but also identified vulnerabilities in the competitor that could accelerate acquisition. The storm outside, the doubts, the betrayal, the societal judgments, raged, but inside me, the storm transformed into focus. I was ready to strike. I realized early on that strategy begins with observation. You can't strike blindly, you have to understand the terrain, the players, and the cracks in the armor. And their competitor, the firm I was now targeting, had more cracks than anyone realized. The arrogance of my former employer had made them blind to it. And that blindness was my advantage. I spent days reviewing their finances, client portfolios, and employee structures. I watched from the outside, attending industry events, listening to casual conversations, noting who was dissatisfied and who held influence quietly. There were whispers of mismanaged projects, missed deadlines, internal conflicts. Employees were loyal, But loyalty alone isn't enough when leadership falters. I made discreet calls to people who had left the competitor firm in the past. I'm just researching the industry, I'd say, careful to sound casual. I listened more than I spoke. One by one, patterns emerged: management indecision, stalled projects, clients unhappy but too polite to leave. The more I uncovered, the more vivid the roadmap became. At night, I would sit in my apartment, the city's hum below, tracing lines on spreadsheets, connecting dots that no one else seemed to see. Each discovery felt like a small victory. Every weak link I identified was a step closer to reclaiming what had been stolen from me. And every step reminded me of the betrayal, sharpening my focus. The discovery process wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. I reached out to employees quietly, building trust, listening to grievances. I offered guidance, subtly, without revealing my intentions. Slowly, allies began to emerge. They didn't know it yet, but they were becoming part of a larger plan, one that would turn the tables completely. And then, a breakthrough: a series of high-value clients who were considering leaving the competitor, frustrated with slow responses and leadership indecision. I realized that if I could position myself strategically, I could swoop in at exactly the right moment, offering stability, vision, and leadership they craved. But discovery also taught me patience. I couldn't rush. One wrong move and the plan could collapse. I spent nights rehearsing conversations, simulating negotiations, preparing for objections, anticipating resistance. Every detail mattered. Every word, every gesture, every connection could become a tool or a weapon. Finally, I looked at the competitor's leadership structure and saw the weakest link: the CEO, overconfident, dismissive, unwilling to see that change was coming. That arrogance would be his undoing. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that in a few months, when I made my move, he would have no idea what hit him. By the end of this discovery phase, I had a complete map of the battlefield: strengths, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. I leaned back in my chair, hand on my belly, and whispered, "You'll see. They think this world belongs to them. But it belongs to those who see it clearly and act." By the time I was ready to act, every piece of the puzzle had been carefully studied, every vulnerability noted, every ally quietly recruited. But planning a takeover is never simple. It's a chess game played with high stakes, and one wrong move could cost everything. Especially when you're carrying more than just your ambition. You're carrying a life inside you. I started with investors. Calls, meetings, presentations. I laid out a plan with meticulous detail: growth projections, client retention strategies, leadership restructuring. I could sense the hesitation in their voices at first. "It's risky," one said, skepticism dripping from each word. I didn't flinch. I smiled under the weight of the challenge and countered calmly: "Risk measured is opportunity seized. And the numbers speak for themselves." By the end of the week, every investor I had approached was not just convinced, they were eager to back me. The irony was delicious: the world had labeled me incapable, distracted, reckless. And yet here I was, commanding faith, resources, and momentum. Next came the timing. I couldn't simply announce my intentions, I needed leverage, precision, the right moment. I studied client behavior, noting which accounts were unstable, which employees were ready to follow someone who offered vision rather than stagnation. I planted subtle suggestions in conversations with key clients, offering reassurance, insight, and expertise. Slowly, they began to see me as a safer, smarter option than their current leadership. Meanwhile, I prepared for the internal battle. The competitor firm's CEO was clever, but overconfident. He dismissed external threats while ignoring the cracks I had uncovered. That arrogance became my advantage. I scheduled confidential meetings with middle management and influential staff, listening, learning, and gradually winning trust. Every word I spoke was calculated, not to reveal my intentions, but to prepare them for the shift they didn't yet know they needed. Even at home, evenings were consumed with strategy. I would sit by the window, city lights blurred by rain, spreadsheets open, pens marking notes and flowcharts. I rehearsed negotiations, anticipating objections, objections to objections, even countermoves I might never need to make. The mental strain was exhausting, but I refused to let doubt enter the room. Doubt is the ally of failure, and I had no room for failure. And all the while, my unborn child reminded me of why I could not falter. Each kick was a heartbeat of resolve, a tiny reminder that I had something worth fighting for beyond myself. The world had underestimated me once, they would not do it again. Finally, the plan began to crystallize. Acquisition strategy? Check. Investor support? Check. Employee loyalty? Check. Timing and leverage? Almost there. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of what I had built settle. Everything was in motion. Soon, the tables would turn. And as I traced the edge of my coffee cup with a finger, I whispered softly, with a confidence born of betrayal and hard-won wisdom, "They fired me thinking this was the end. Soon, they'll see it's only the beginning, and that I'm the one writing the rules now." Just when I thought the pieces were falling into place, the universe reminded me that plans are only as strong as the obstacles they withstand. The first setback came unexpectedly. A key investor called late one night, his voice tight with doubt. "Are you sure about this? The board of the competitor is stronger than you think. One misstep, and you could lose everything, including your credibility," he warned. I didn't panic. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my belly, and spoke slowly, deliberately. "I've anticipated every objection, every weakness, every risk. If I falter, it won't be from lack of preparation." His silence on the other end was telling. Even he could feel the conviction behind my words. But conviction alone doesn't stop the storm, it only steadies you as it hits. Then came internal resistance. The competitor's CEO began noticing subtle shifts, clients returning my calls, managers quietly aligning with me. He ramped up pressure, doubling down on meetings, scrutinizing employee communications, and even attempting to intimidate staff loyal to me. I heard whispers of threats. "Don't trust her. She's unstable. She's reckless." It stung, but it didn't break me. Each whispered attempt to derail my progress became fuel for my strategy. I didn't respond with emotion, I responded with action. I organized client meetings, secured contracts, and ensured that every interaction reinforced confidence in my leadership. Every step forward was a quiet strike against the arrogance of my former peers and now, my competitor. Personal strain hit hardest at night. Pregnancy exhaustion combined with long workdays, constant negotiations, and the pressure of secrecy left me moments away from collapse. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, mind spinning. Doubt crept in. What if I fail? What if they expose my plan? What if I lose everything I've built so far? But then I felt it, a gentle kick, a reminder that this fight was bigger than ambition. It was survival, reclamation, and legacy. The tiny pulse inside me reminded me that fear was temporary, resolve was permanent. Finally, a near-climactic moment arrived. A major client, the linchpin of my acquisition strategy, threatened to sign a last-minute deal with my competitor. I flew into action, arranging an emergency meeting. The room was tense, the air thick with uncertainty. I laid out my plan clearly, showing not just numbers, but vision, leadership, and the future they could be part of. By the end of the meeting, the client not only stayed, they pledged additional support, tipping the balance squarely in my favor. By surviving these mini-crises, I learned the rhythm of the battle. The world would resist, doubt would creep, and obstacles would rise. But with strategy, patience, and relentless focus, every challenge became a stepping stone. That night, as rain streaked my apartment window, I whispered softly to my unborn child, "They think they can stop me. They think this is their world. But they don't know, I've already won the first battles. The storm is mine to command. The morning of the acquisition felt like the calm before a storm, but inside me, adrenaline coursed like lightning. Months of preparation, careful observation, and calculated strategy had led to this exact moment. Every setback, every whisper of doubt, every sleepless night had been training for today. I arrived at the competitor firm before sunrise. The streets were quiet, the city still cloaked in shadows, a mirror of the secrecy that had protected my plans until now. I parked a block away, checking my notes for the final time. Investor confirmations were ready. Legal teams were on standby. Employees loyal to me had been quietly briefed. Every piece of the puzzle was aligned. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and confidence when I entered. The CEO looked up, smug, overconfident, unaware that the tide was about to turn. "I hear you've been making calls," he said, his tone dripping with derision. "Quite ambitious, but risky." I smiled faintly, setting my briefcase down. "Risk measured is opportunity," I said, calm, deliberate, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "And opportunity is exactly what I'm offering you." Negotiations began. At first, they were tense, punctuated with legal jargon, defensive arguments, and attempts to intimidate. But I had anticipated every counter, every objection, every bluff. I presented not just financial projections, but strategic insights, client retention plans, operational improvements, leadership restructuring, and long-term growth strategies. Every word landed with precision. The CEO tried to regain control, interrupting, raising his voice, attempting to assert dominance. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. I remained calm, letting logic and evidence carry the weight of authority. "You've ignored cracks for too long," I said softly, but sharply. "I see them. I can fix them. And the world, our clients, and your employees, they trust the person who can lead." Hours passed like minutes. Each concession I secured, each agreement signed, felt like a victory, a subtle dismantling of the empire that had once seemed untouchable. My competitors were stunned by my composure, my knowledge, my vision. They realized too late that the woman they had dismissed, the one they had called reckless, was now the one holding the pen, the deal, and the keys to their future. By late afternoon, the acquisition was official. I leaned back in the chair at the head of the boardroom table, my pulse still racing, feeling the culmination of months of planning. Silence filled the room as the gravity of the moment sank in. The competitor CEO finally looked at me, not with derision, but with a mixture of shock and begrudging respect. I allowed myself a quiet smile. The first move had been made, the tables had turned, and the world had been reminded, underestimating me was their greatest mistake. And as I looked out of the window at the city below, glowing with the last rays of sunlight, I whispered softly, almost to my unborn child, "They fired me thinking this was the end. They didn't know. It was only the beginning." The morning after the acquisition felt unreal. Walking into the competitor firm, now officially mine, I felt the shift in the air immediately. Employees who had whispered doubts, who had hesitated to trust, now looked at me differently. Some with hope, some with disbelief, and some, quietly, with fear. The same fear I had once felt when they dismissed me. I spent the first hours walking through the halls, observing the subtle power dynamics, noting which departments were thriving and which were stagnating. Every interaction was a test. Every glance, a measure of trust. And every decision I made, no matter how small, sent a signal: this was no longer their world. This was mine. The former CEO tried to assert himself one last time. "I've built this company from the ground up," he said, voice strained with anger. "You can't just take it over and change everything overnight." I didn't rise to the bait. I smiled softly, the calm authority in my voice cutting sharper than any argument. "I'm not here to erase what you've built. I'm here to ensure it survives. And to do that, the rules have to change." The next few days were a whirlwind. Policies were reviewed, departments reorganized, key employees who had been overlooked were given new responsibilities. I made decisions with clarity and precision, ensuring that every action reinforced the fact that leadership was no longer determined by legacy or ego. It was determined by vision, competence, and respect. Resistance arose almost immediately. Some managers, loyal to the old guard, challenged decisions quietly in meetings, subtly undermining directives. I met each challenge with calm firmness, listening, acknowledging concerns, and then acting decisively. I discovered that fear and uncertainty crumble when met with competence and transparency. The public response was equally powerful. Clients and partners who had once been hesitant were now reassured by my leadership. My first communications were firm but visionary, promises kept, strategies clarified, and a message that the company was moving forward with integrity and strength. The whispers of doubt began to fade. That night, alone in my office, I finally allowed myself a moment of reflection. I traced my hand along the polished wood of my desk, thinking about the weeks of struggle, betrayal, and careful planning. I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had reclaimed control, yes, but more than that, I had reshaped the narrative. They had underestimated me once. They would never do it again. I looked at the photo of my former company's executives, the faces that had once laughed at me, and I whispered quietly, almost to myself, "This isn't just revenge. This is justice." And it's only the beginning of a legacy built on respect, not fear. The day of final confrontation arrived like a storm I had been anticipating for months. Investors, clients, and key employees all came together in the boardroom, the tension thick enough to taste. The former CEO was present, flanked by his remaining loyalists, eyes darting nervously as he realized the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. I walked in confidently, every step measured, every glance calculated. The room went quiet, the murmurs fading as if the walls themselves recognized the new authority. I took my place at the head of the table, letting silence speak before words. "Good morning," I said evenly, calm but commanding. "Today, we're not just discussing transitions or numbers. We're discussing the future of this company. And the future is not dictated by ego, by fear, or by legacy. It's dictated by competence, integrity, and vision." The former CEO scoffed. "You think you can run this company better than I ever did? You're inexperienced. You've overstepped." I met his gaze directly, letting the full weight of months of planning, research, and perseverance press into the room. "I don't think. I know. I've studied every weakness, listened to every voice that went unheard, and prepared to lead where you failed. This company won't survive on arrogance, it will thrive on leadership. And I am ready to provide it." The boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Clients and investors exchanged glances. Middle managers, who had been uncertain, now leaned forward, sensing a tide shift they could no longer resist. Then came the final test. A high-stakes negotiation with a major client, one that had threatened to leave if changes weren't made immediately. The former CEO attempted to assert influence, speaking over me, reminding the client of his legacy. But I remained composed, calmly presenting a vision backed by facts, projections, and strategic plans. My voice didn't waver. My confidence didn't falter. And slowly, one by one, the client's objections were addressed, resolved, and replaced with commitment. By the afternoon, the room had shifted completely. The former CEO slumped in his chair, realizing that authority was no longer his. Employees were following, clients were aligned, and investors were nodding in agreement. The power I had meticulously earned now radiated outward, undeniable and complete. I allowed myself a faint smile, looking out at the team I had united, the clients I had secured, and the company I had transformed. Months of betrayal, setbacks, and sleepless nights culminated here, not in revenge for the sake of anger, but in victory built on vision, strategy, and resilience. As the former CEO finally left the boardroom, silent and defeated, I stood and addressed everyone once more. This company is more than any one person. Its strength comes from the people, the integrity, and the work we do together. Today marks a new chapter, one where leadership is earned, not inherited, and success is built on trust, not fear. The applause that followed wasn't just polite, it was genuine. A wave of relief, respect, and hope filled the room. And in that moment, as I felt the weight of triumph settle around me, I realized the most important victory wasn't just taking control, it was proving, once and for all, that I belonged here. Later that night, alone in my office, I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion mixing with satisfaction. I traced the edge of the desk, feeling the journey etched into every scar, every sleepless night, every challenge faced. I whispered softly to my unborn child, they thought they could stop me. But here we are, stronger, ready, and unbroken. This is our legacy, and no one can take it away. The storm had passed. The battle was over, and the echoes of triumph still lingered in the halls of the company I now led. Walking through the office that had once felt like a foreign battlefield, I saw faces of employees who now trusted me, not out of fear, but out of respect. That, more than any deal or acquisition, was the true victory. I paused by the large windows overlooking the city, sunlight filtering in through the glass. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. The tension, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, they all melted away, leaving only a quiet clarity. I had reclaimed more than a career. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my belief in what I could achieve, even when the world doubted me. In the silence, I reflected on every betrayal, every challenge, every whispered doubt that had once threatened to derail me. They had all been lessons in disguise. The people who dismissed me, the managers who underestimated me, even my former employer. They had shown me exactly what I needed to overcome. And in that overcoming, I discovered not just skill and strategy, but patience, resilience, and vision. I thought of my unborn child, the tiny heartbeat that had pushed me forward through sleepless nights and tense negotiations. I realized that this journey wasn't just for me, it was for the next generation. The lesson I wanted to pass on wasn't just about business, strategy, or revenge. It was about believing in yourself when the world says you can't, about taking control of your destiny, and about transforming pain into purpose. That evening, I walked through the now empty office, touching the polished surfaces, the desks of employees who had stood by me, and the walls that had witnessed my triumphs. Every corner held a memory, a battle fought, a victory earned. I placed my hand on the edge of the CEO's former chair, smiling quietly. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was closure. I sat at my desk, writing in my journal, reflecting on the journey. Honor is not given, it's earned, I wrote. Respect is not demanded, it's proven. And power, real power, comes from knowing your worth, standing firm, and lifting others as you rise. Later that night, I looked out at the city skyline, the lights shimmering like a constellation of possibilities. I whispered softly to my child, we've arrived. We've won. And one day, you'll understand that no storm, no betrayal, and no obstacle can stop someone who refuses to surrender. Finally, I felt peace. Not the hollow relief of temporary victory, but the deep, steady calm that comes from knowing you've faced every challenge, endured every setback, and emerged stronger on the other side. I had not only reclaimed my career, I had rewritten the story of my life. And as I closed my eyes, I knew this. The world might have tried to limit me, to silence me, to define me by their mistakes. But I had learned the truth that every person must one day discover, strength isn't given, it's forged. And I had forged mine, with patience, courage, and an unwavering belief in what I could accomplish. The journey had ended, but the lessons would last a lifetime. And in that knowledge, I finally allowed myself to smile, knowing that the storm had passed, and I had not only survived it, I had mastered it.